All right, Gary, I'm going to start with you. I'm just going to go right down the line, introducing folks, and then we'll get to some questions and answers. These introductions will be short, and if I mispronounce a name, I sincerely apologize. Gary Staples is the president, owner, and manager of the White Acres Farm and 8-house poultry operation, along with 60 head of registered Charolais cattle. He served as a board member of the National Poultry Growers Association, as well as vice president of the Alabama Contract Poultry Growers Association. He's on the board of directors of the St. Clair County Soil and Water Conservation. He served as an officer of the St. Clair County Cattlemen's Association, the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. He's presently a major in the Army Reserves. We thank you for your service. He served as a past company commander of Signal Company 20th Special Forces and is team leader of Operational Detachment A21 1st Battalion 20th Special Forces. Carol Morrison is next, and she is a farmer from Maryland. She and her family raised chickens under contract for 23 years on their family farm. She helped organize the Delmarva Poultry Justice Alliance and served as executive director for 8 years. Currently, she's a private agricultural consultant specializing in local food systems. Gary Alexander is owner and operator of Alexander Farms, Inc., a poultry production and a property development business in Westminster, South Carolina. He markets 3.2 million broilers a year through his 18-broiler house farm and develops residential properties as well. He serves on the board of directors of Ag South Farm Credit, ACA, and Ag First Farm Credit Bank, of which he serves on the audit committee. Additionally, he serves on the board of directors of the CS Poultry Federation and the Outdoor Dream Foundation, an organization providing outdoor adventures for children with life-threatening illnesses. KW, who is to my immediate left, has made Cameron, North Carolina her home for, well, I won't say how many years.
You can say that.
Okay, 55 years. Just trying to be a gentleman here. She lives on a third-generation farm, continues to raise meat goats and a small flock of chickens. She's taught kindergarten for 15 years. She and her husband have built 2 broiler houses and raised poultry until October of 2008 when their contract was terminated. Robert Lumsey, did I pronounce that right, sir? Mr. Lumsey is currently a heavy equipment operator. In April of 1999, he purchased Lumsey Poultry Farm, where he raised chickens for a living and provided jobs for those in the community who were unemployed. In 2006, Robert lost his contract, and it's his desire to regain his contract and once again become a business owner. Sandra Pridgeon is a 7th-generation family farmer from Snow Hill, North Carolina. She transitioned the farm from tobacco and contract poultry production to a sustainable grass-based fed marketing meats directly to consumers through farmers markets, buying clubs, and restaurants. Rainbow Meadow Farms currently markets poultry, eggs, beef, pork, lamb, and rabbit locally in North Carolina. And she spent the last 5 years, conducting on-farm research of pasture-based livestock systems and poultry genetics appropriate for those systems. And our last panelist on the end is Shane Wooten. Did I pronounce that right? Shane is raised on a poultry and cattle farm in DeKalb County, Alabama. In 1997, he purchased a farm next to his father's farm and began constructing 12 broiler houses where he continues to raise poultry. In 2006, he also became an insurance agent for the LFA Insurance, specializing in poultry farm insurance. Assistant Attorney General Varney and I thank all members of the panel for their participation, and what I'd like to do is start off with a question that we'll direct to all of the panelists here today and ask you to comment on it. We'll start, Gary, with you and just kind of work right down the line. And basically the question is this. The poultry industry over the last 40 years has become consolidated and to a certain extent vertically integrated. And the number of companies for growers to do business varies from each region of the country. In your experience, how does that impact and affect the fairness of contracts, and what options should we consider in taking a look at those circumstances where there may be only 1 or 2 companies able to do business? What needs to be done to make sure that farmers and growers get a fair shake?
Secretary, I appreciate y'all coming today, but talking about the integrators being in one area, in my county alone, we've got 2, but they do not cross lines at this time anyway. I wished I had an answer for you to tell you how to fix that problem, but if we could just get fair and competitive markets with these people to where we could, as a grower, be able to go to another integrator and say, look, I can do this for you, and get them to help us with that situation. As it stands right now, with the contracts that we're offered now, it's a either take it or leave it situation. So that really puts us in a bind as a grower.
I'd like to thank you for being here today as well and for giving us this opportunity. As far as the consolidation of the industry, there used to be 7 poultry companies where I'm from. We're down to 4 now. 2 are very small poultry companies, 2 are major poultry companies. And every year we see things downsizing more and more where, you know, smaller ones are bought up. I don't see much difference in contracts between companies. There might be a few different words that are used, but basically they're the same. So, you know, the contracts aren't really affected by that as to whether you're big or small. Contracts are basically the same.
Gary, your thoughts?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. In our particular area, we are afforded 3 integrators, and when you look at those contracts, each one of them is just minor cents apart of each other. They're very equal and very equitable. And in research and preparation for this meeting, I looked at an area of 14 states served by the Ag First Farm Credit Bank. And those contracts throughout that 14 states are, again, within pennies of each other. In 2 or 3 cases, we saw contracts where the grower only had a choice of 1 integrator, were in some cases better than the ones where you had multiple choices. So here, the contract portion of this business is just like any market-driven decision. It's based upon competition and availability of services.
In our area, we have more than one company, but it seems to be a written rule that if you grow for one company, you really don't have the opportunity to even cross those lines to go to another company. And with like what they're saying, the contracts are pretty much the same, but it's not a common practice. If you start with one company, you usually stay with them.
Robert?
Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. But as everyone else has said, in our community, there are several companies. But once you start with one, that's the only one that will allow you a contract. They won't cross the lines to come to your farm.
I would say that I basically agree with Kay, what she said. What we found is that the companies, there's a slight variation in maybe the type of heating system that they have, you know, the company they use for their heater or their feed line system. And so if you end up trying to go to another integrator, then that integrator is going to say, well, you know, you're going to have to make all these changes to the specific, you know, Cumberland heating system or a particular, you know, feed system that we use. So they use that as an excuse not to take you on. And also the other thing is, if they do end up taking you on, their preference is always for getting, if they're in expansion mode, their preference is always for getting new houses. And as soon as, what we found in our experiences, as soon as they can get new houses, they are going to dump those people that that they had brought on from another company.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In my area, we've been very fortunate. At one time, we actually had 5 integrators that served the area where I live, just kind of in a sweet spot there. So competition has been pretty good in that area. You mentioned vertical integration and our aspects and thoughts on that. Vertical integration, I think, has been key to the poultry industry for the last 40 years and has provided a stable income for the poultry farmer in a stable market. But as far as competition, I think we've had a pretty good competition in our area compared to some others.
During the course of our first panel, Commissioner Staples mentioned concerns that he had about a lack of communication or miscommunication or an inability to communicate between companies and producers. I'd be curious to know from your own personal experience or from experiences of people that you know and trust, do you share the Commissioner's concerns, and if so, what suggestions would you make for us as to how we might be able to help improve communication? And I'm going to just start this way and come down the other way, just to be fair.
Well, communication is between grower and integrator is one thing that I prepared a statement on. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and start with that.
Feel free.
A couple of the issues that is facing the contract growers that I would like to discuss is, number one, rapid rise in expenses over the past few years, and number two, the breakdown in communication between contract growers and integrators. Just a quick example of expense increase. When my brother and I completed our construction of our houses in 1999, expenses have dramatically increased, but although there are many different input expenses that go into a poultry farm, propane cost is one of the largest. And in 1999, our propane cost was about approximately $42,000 a year. In 2009, that same propane cost had increased to approximately $92,000 a year. That was a 120% increase. So that was a bottom line cut off of our profitability. Those increases have dramatically affected profitability for the contract grower. In fact, the integrated system that has provided such a good stable income for so long, we actually lost money in 2008 on our farm for the first time. This discrepancy between income and increased expenses is including myself and a lot of other growers, as you had mentioned in the earlier panel, we have had to go outside the farm to provide for our families. I think in the same time frame in comparison, I think contract pay, or for me, contract pay has increased approximately 17%, from 4.7 cents per pound to 5.5 cents per pound, which is nowhere close to offset the rise in cost. Integrators also have not been immune to these rapid rises in cost and input expenses, but unlike the contract grower, the integrators do have the ability to reduce production and drive the chicken prices up, which helps their profitability. The contract grower does not have that opportunity. In fact, I read in the Poultry Times magazine this week that integrators are actually are poised to increase production because of some of the contract or some of the production cutbacks that they had made. The article stated that poultry prices were at a level to where good profits could be made. Unfortunately, integrators do not realize that the need that continues to drive those prices up in order to be able to increase contract pay. I think it's an inability of the integrators to understand the financial strain that is placed on contract growers at this time. I believe that is key. The key reason for that is a communication breakdown inside the companies and also from grower to integrator. That communication breakdown, as we all know, communication is very important in every business. And I was raised on a poultry farm, and one of the biggest changes that has occurred that I feel has affected communication over the last 20 years is that 20 years ago, almost every employee in our area, almost every employee of the integrator in the grow outside, from the service technician all the way up to the complex manager, were actually contract growers themselves. So that close relationship between the company and the contract growers gave a better representation of the contract growers in any company decisions that were made. In comparison, over the last few years, that number has steadily declined, and some integrators have actually banned their employees from being contract growers. In effect, the contract grower has lost their representation inside the companies are inside the integrators. That has in turn led to uninformed decisions by the companies themselves that has affected the contract grower adversely. This communication breakdown inside these companies themselves has become more evident in the past few years as profit margins for the companies have tightened, and they've also tightened for the growers. So the constant pressure that these tightening of margins has placed on employees to keep costs at a minimum has caused some employees to be reluctant to bring up issues that may have concerned the contract grower because it would be an actual additional cost to that company. So I do not believe that is a result of the company's employees' negligence. I just simply believe that this is just a result of the high input expenses and the low profit margins over the last few years, and just the general corporate structure and how communication travels up the corporate structure.
Thank you, Sandra. And feel free, I know that folks have prepared, in some cases, written statements. If you'd like to read them, that's fine, or summarize them, that's fine, in response to this particular question, or if you just simply want to furnish them. We are making a record and transcript of this, and they'd be incorporated in the record. So, question about communication and your views about this.
As you know, we are independent poultry producers now, but what I'd like to say is that when we were contract producers, some of the things that we noticed as a lack of communication was what they term as new growers contract, where you initially start out with an initial contract, and then in a few years they bring in a new growers contract, and you have to sign it before you can receive your next flock. And there's been no negotiation and no communication between the grower or a group of growers for that company and a negotiation of that contract with the integrator. So you either sign it or you don't receive your next flock. And when you have that kind of debt load over you, of course you're going to choose to sign the contract. You feel that there's no other option when you owe $500,000 or $1 million. Also, there's a lack of communication in that what is said in the contract and what is verbally communicated or verbally implied is oftentimes two different things. My dad was, after the first company shut down that complex, my dad was taken on by another company called Case Farms, and with that, in order to be taken on, he took on an $80,000 debt to make equipment renovations on 16-year-old poultry houses so that he could grow for that company. And the company, as soon as they could get brand new houses built with tobacco allotment buyout money that farmers were getting, they dropped those former Purdue farmers, and they were left with debt. My dad, for one of them, was left with an $80,000 debt. He grew 12 flocks for them, and they dumped him.
Thank you, sir. I'm sitting here listening to no communication. Our problem is that when we have a problem with the company, you have a service person comes out and they tell you what the company says. They tell you, with me now, back in when I lost my farm, they came out and we worked together and got my farm straight, and I asked a question as to, would it cause me to lose my contract? And they said what the deficiency that I had would not cause me to terminate my contract that afternoon. And at 6 p.m., I got a phone call from Sanderson Farm. My contract was terminated. And I'm going, I didn't get a chance to talk to anyone. I didn't get a chance to tell them what happened. So our problem is not the right amount of communication.
Well, this is kind of in response to what Robert said. That's one of the ugly realities that the growers are talking about. Communication, the growers that are here today are in jeopardy because of intimidation by company personnel. And they're taking a big risk. Every grower here is taking a big risk. And if you ask them, they'll tell you. Communication. I had a grower tell me 2 weeks ago, he was talking to the service person and he was questioning the quality of the chicks that he just got. And the service person, the answer he got was, you should just be glad you got a job. Well, the grower got the message real quick, because in North Carolina, right there in his neighborhood, there are 160 poultry houses sitting empty, and growers have no way to pay those payments.
I've got some prepared comments, but I think you can.
Gary, you want to speak into the microphone, make it easier to hear?
I've got a prepared comment, but I think you can reflect upon the communication, as an earlier gentleman stated, that this is a partnership, and it's a partnership between oftentimes an individual and a corporation, but the thing that drives it is the communication. And from my prepared comments, I think it'll address my feelings. Integrators provide a minimum risk and total market dynamic protection for many individuals engaging in poultry production. Nowhere can anyone go into business totally insulated from market risk and consumer preference changes. Without integrators, growers could not afford to be in the chicken business because of the cash flow demands and market swings at their own farm level. Growers realize that integrators have a lot of risks with capital, fixed assets, operational cash, and etc. But the real success of an integrator depends upon their ability to get growers to participate with them to achieve a common goal. In most cases, a vertically integrated operation has total assets at risk much less than the collective dollars at risk by all growers as a single group. Poultry grow-out's a great opportunity for young and beginning farmers. Through USDA with several levels of guarantees, low equity levels, integrator-assisted cash flow are opportunities that normal businesses do not have access to. A young farmer with access to land can complete a poultry house and be in a positive cash flow position in as little as 16 weeks. A poultry house well maintained has a life of over 30 years. Most contracts will pay the grower for his time, provide manure sales, pay off debt in 12 to 15 years. If a grower has off-farm income, there's great tax benefits available during this amortization period. A well-managed poultry operation can be a cash cow for 20 years. Oftentimes, upgrades are necessary. These allow the grower to make a minimum additional investment, again, to enjoy a favorable tax benefit. The tax consideration and complete utilization of depreciation. Current grow-out contracts in our area with integrators who serve us provide about a 20% return on the investment. Historically, prior to the latest economic challenge in poultry production, as a percentage of assets held by a bank, only 2% of the poultry loans have wound up in non-accrual. Chicken houses come with a lot of USDA assistance. You hear a lot about row crop disasters, but we have disaster programs in the chicken houses. We have energy upgrade grants. We have grants for manure holding facilities and dead bird composters. Poultry growers make a commitment to treat the chicken house like a small manufacturing facility are successful, not like something to be done at the end of the day. The grower must understand the grow-out rules, lighting programs, feed schedules are a result of large volumes of data being analyzed to best fit the grow-out cycle. Each grower is to provide daily the very best grow-out conditions for a particular breed to perform. Quality of a grower, in most cases, is reflected by his performance, but every grower is subject to get weak birds or just bad performance over a given period of time. The competitive contract formula is the best way to reward the hardest workers with the greatest amount of return. These contracts, selling like birds with like diets with like weather conditions for a fixed period of time, are very equitable. Fixed contracts with an off-farm owner would not be healthy nor contribute to the ultimate product competitiveness in the marketplace. Growers must be held accountable for performance through competition. Integrated requirements for upgrades to current housing standards is sometimes not all it's asked to be. A house built in the current cycle has a state-of-the-art equipment and facilities. Those new facilities will always outperform the technology and equipment of aging facilities. In our area, growers are often allowed to upgrade to stay at the current pay level, or they're offered a contract at a lesser level, continuing business as usual. Again, another example of risk equals rewards. Historically, sometimes what we see in our area is that the terminated grower refuses to see that he needs to be more efficient, and that reflects in the communication we were talking about. Reward is a function of risk and effort. When you look at the big picture, a grower starts out with just a few less birds or extended out times is a small price to pay for the total success of the long-term operation. I appreciate the fact that I've never had to write a check to make an integrator whole based upon market conditions. The current oversight provided by GIPSA serves the industry well. There's no need for more government intervention in the poultry industry. A brief look at packers and stockers complaints show a minimum amount of intervention necessary to maintain fair and equitable standards. If you look at GIPSA's website, there's
Folks, let's make sure that everyone gets a chance to have their say in a respectful way. So continue.
the limited antitrust immunity provided by Caper Volstead and other federal statutes enable growers and integrators to join together collectively, process and market their products. Because buyer power in the agricultural marketplace is strong or stronger than it was in 1922 when Caper Volstead was enacted, the Act's protection continues to be critically important in today's environment. I strongly believe any action to eliminate or dilute Caper Volstead or similar federal statutes would harm the success and efficiencies of our rural communities.
Thanks, Gary.
Would you like for me to just answer the question?
Yeah.
Or just go ahead?
Well, no.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. It has to do with communication and whether or not the commissioner suggested that there was a need for better communication. And if you want to incorporate whatever statements you'd like, feel free to do that. I want to give you an opportunity to have.
I think first off, the communication idea, there probably is a great lack of communication. I'd say it's a one-sided communication. The grower listens and the company tells you what to do. That's been my experience. And, you know, it's, for instance, you know, we've had mention of demanded upgrades to poultry houses. You know, the company will come out and say, you have to do this, this, and this, or you get no more chickens. They hold the contract over your head. That's no way to communicate with anybody, number one. It's going to make a person mad. Secondly, specifically, after 23 years of raising chickens, our contract was terminated because we refused to do demanded upgrades. And, you know, a few weeks before, prior to receiving the termination letter for our contract, we were given an Outstanding Producer Award by the very company that was terminating our contract. So I don't think that communication works. I mean, there was no communication there. We were putting out a good product. It was just said, you do it or get no chickens. I really think communications have been tried and have failed. I've been at this for a while. I've seen a lot of efforts to make communications work. And I can honestly say I have not seen anything change since the early 1990s within the industry, trying to use communications between growers and poultry companies. Secondly, I'd like to add in, you know, the ranking system, which should be maybe a form of communication, but the ranking system is how growers are paid. And the inputs to the farm versus the output of pounds of meat moved off the farm kind of sums up really easily to explain how this ranking system works. However, all of the inputs are direct poultry company product and are placed on the grower's farm on a good faith basis. A grower must trust a company to deliver them quality inputs for their farm to be competitive, to raise a marketable product, and for them to have the best potential of farm income. The ranking system in no way reflects a grower's performance. It's a reflection of the quality of company inputs in producing the output of pounds of meat. Company control over the inputs decides flock performance and farm income. This control can lead to hampering or enhancing the farm's access to fair and free trade. Someone earlier, mentioned about company employees having poultry farms. It's been said many, many times by growers that, the company employees who are running poultry farms get the best inputs put on their farm, since they're the ones that are influencing and controlling where these inputs go. They decide who gets what. So, some companies have banned employees from having contracts on their farms. Other companies haven't. Obviously, if some companies have banned this practice, then there must be some good reason for it. I think the bottom line is that, unless every farm placed in a week's ranking receives the exact same and identical inputs, the ranking system is unfair. We can go all the way back to chick quality that's delivered to farms, breeds that perform differently. Growers aren't consulted on, the breeds or genetics or, which one performs better and, well, no, I don't want them. I'd rather have this batch over here. We have to take what the company brings us, and then we're supposed to, perform our contractual duty of raising the best flock possible. There's a lot of deciding factors before the chicks are ever delivered to the farm. The genetics, the health, the age, and care of the breeder flock. That decides how well the chicks perform. Has nothing to do with the grower. It's a company input. They're the ones that control this. Transportation of eggs, from breeder farms to company hatcheries varies, as well as the operations at the company-owned hatcheries before they're, the chicks are hatched out to come to the farm. Feed is another issue. It's the most costly input for raising a flock of chickens and is the foremost influence on a grower's ranking. Excuse me. Feed is formulated, mixed, loaded, and weighed by the company and then delivered to the farm. Feed must be accepted by the grower on the company say-so, and there's no guarantee that the feed is of the highest quality or quantity. Personally, we've had several issues of feed quality and quantity coming to the farm. Number one, feed quality. We've had feed so bad delivered to the farm that it actually froze in the feed bin. We had to have someone come in and take the feed bin apart, chop the frozen feed out, repair the equipment, put new feed back in, and that had nothing to do with our performance. That was determined by the company. So again, there was no communication there. Well, you know what? We really delivered you some really bad feed, so let's see if we can't fix this and work it out. And, really you shouldn't be penalized for something that was our mistake. Instead, the communication that comes across is, we didn't do anything wrong, it's on you, and that's the way it goes. Quantities of feed being delivered to the farms. There's no way to verify how much feed actually comes. It's, again, as I said, weighed on the company scales. we get a weight ticket, and we have to accept it because the company says so. Personally, we were going to put scales on our farm to verify weights of feed that were being delivered by the company. First, we were informed by the company that if we were to put scales on the farm, that there was no law that said they had to go across our scales because they own the chickens. Then we were told point blank, well, if you do it, we're going to terminate your contract. Now, I see nothing wrong with the grower wanting to put a set of scales on their farm. It helps them be a better manager to control what is coming onto the farm and what is going off of the farm. Why would a company have a problem with you putting scales on the farm? Again, this was, there was no communication about this. There was no discussion. It's if you do, your contract's terminated. Personally, I can't count the many, many times that I have heard in one shape or form of another that our contract was going to be terminated if we did such and such. That's no way to communicate with people who are your business partner. And I think probably the last, thing that I'd like to address here is the confusions and the frustrations, of how a grower can find help under the Packers and Stockyards Act. And I know maybe it does have to do with communication, but just in a different form between growers and government agencies. And, it's common knowledge that, GIPSA only has certain authorities. They can only investigate complaints. If there's any violations found, it has to be referred to the Department of Justice. And, it's understandable to me, although frustrating, that the Department of Justice has, a lot more important issues to address than the issues of one contract poultry farmer. I mean, we do have bad guys out there in the country and around the world. So, that right there, that is understood, but then it needs to be understood, too, that once a grower does file a complaint with GIPSA, they're left wide open for retaliation by the company they contract with, and it's the single most important fact that keeps growers from filing complaints. Companies are also aware of the inability of enforcement of the Act, and GIPSA investigations, I've heard comments from company personnel that it's nothing more than a hassle in their daily operations because they know that there will be no enforcement of the Act because GIPSA does not have that authority. So I think probably what needs to be done there, either USDA needs to have the same authority and powers over poultry as they do over other livestock, or a clear and concise method needs to be developed in which communications are opened and which easily flow between USDA, GIPSA, and the Department of Justice in order that growers do have an open avenue for making complaints and, for knowing that this information went to all the proper places it should have gone and help can be given. And that's, thank you.
Gary? Gary?
Secretary Bill Sack, I'd like to comment on your communications thing first and then read a statement that regardless of what some of the press releases say was prepared by me and not by somebody else. It may not be as good as it could have been by somebody else. But as far as the communication-wise, when I first started, we had a yearly meeting with my integrator. Went on for about 2 years, but since that time, even with that integrator and the new one, the only communication I have is with my service tech, unless I ask to speak to someone, and if I get the opportunity to do that, it's one-on-one, me and whoever I asked to, and my service tech. So the communication problem is a problem. I really feel it is. What y'all can do for us, I don't really know, but it is a problem. And if you don't mind, I'll read my statement. I'm here today to speak to you about my experiences as a poultry grower, as well as those of other poultry growers. I'm not here just for myself. Been in the business for 9 years. At that time, I had a 7-year contract. 4 years ago, I changed integrators when I was given a 3-year contract. Last year, I signed a new contract, flock to flock. What that means is every 60 days, that's the only time I'm actually under contract to grow chickens. At the end of that 60 days, I can be terminated. I personally borrowed $1.5 million, and everything I got's mortgaged, so I can be a poultry grower. I got 8 poultry houses, 2 dwelling houses, 180 acres of land, and all the life insurance policies I got. As a poultry grower, with everything I've been mortgaged, I had no choice but to sign that flock-to-flock contract. It's like many of them have said, either I sign it or I ain't got no chicken. Without any chickens, I can't pay any bills. I can't pay my mortgage. Those chicken houses are designed for one thing, grow chickens. I personally feel I got a good relationship with my integrator. I work hard for them to raise a good quality chicken. But I wonder how I can feel really secure knowing that every 8 to 9 weeks I may not have a relationship at all with them. Poultry's been grown under the contracts for over 50 years. The company owns the chickens, they control the quality of the chickens, they control the feed, and they control the feed weighing system. They control the pay system, and they can cancel my contract at any time. They also can require expensive upgrades. These upgrades usually cost a substantial amount of money, which means I've got to take out another loan. And when I do that, I'm not necessarily reimbursed for it by the company in any way. There's 3 growers in my county that were given a letter on a Thursday that told them they had to make upgrades. The following Monday, they got another letter that said you're no longer an employee or you're no longer a grower with this company. When this could not be done, the company terminated contracts, and since there's not another company in our area at that time, they were left without chickens and the mortgage that they could not pay. New houses built in our area of Alabama are given, at this time, some of the areas are given near 10-year contracts with a pay system that, according to the contract, will not let them make less than 0.0 cents per pound, regardless of their performance. My newest 2 houses are 2-year-old and equipped the same as these new houses. My contract is flock to flock, not 10 years. My bottom pay is a .0430. I've also known growers in our county that their bottom pay is a .0325. With a flock-to-flock contract, the contract can be changed at any time. With the cost of power, water, and gas going higher every year, you would think a company would help compensate for more energy costs. My gas alone has gone from 70 cents to $1.28 in the past 6 years, just the gas. Last year, I signed a new contract, and instead of helping me with my energy allowance, they took away .0030 cents per pound over a year's grow out. On my farm alone, just my farm, that's a $4,500 savings to the company and a loss to my farm. And although I came here on my own today, it's not without a lot of worry when I leave that I'll have some retaliation. I spent 20 years in the military, and I feel strong about the United States that we should be able to. I appreciate y'all for coming, and I hope y'all will help us. Thank you.
I'm curious to talk to several of you in terms of your experience with the ranking system, which Carol mentioned. And let me start with you, Gary Alexander. Are you operating under the same system and
We operate under the same system. We're fortunate enough our integrator separates the breeds of birds, separates the time of grow out, because each breed of bird comes with a different diet, and we're settled like kind to like kind each week.
so you're not experiencing the same difficulties that Carol experienced?
Well, it results in a ranking system, but that ranking is based upon your performance with a given set of conditions, and everybody you're ranked with has equal conditions.
Okay. Is that the experience that
I grow for Fieldale Farms, a small family operation in northeast Georgia.
okay, all right. Gary?
In my instance, I grow what we call, or what the industry calls a big bird, and I'm maybe a little bit different from some of the other growers up here. I know most of them in my county grow for another company, and they settle with 15 to 20 to sometimes 30 growers. In my instance, I settle with, I think the most I've ever settled with is 5. So this ranking system doesn't hurt me as bad. And there again, I'm here to work it for all growers, not just myself. I still stand to lose money under the ranking system. The ranking system has good points, but it has a lot more bad points than it does good points.
Okay. How about folks on this side? Experience the ranking system.
I think my experience with the ranking system has not been as nearly as good as some of them, and not nearly as bad as others. I think the ranking system is I think was put into place to push performance, and the way it was designed, if you done a good job, then you would get rewarded for that. Or if you done a better job, if you put more of an effort into your grow out, then you would get rewarded for that. Of course, it's got its good and bad aspects, but overall, I really don't know how the proper way to fix that would be, besides maybe making sure all the playing field is level, like the Gary, I believe it was, mentioned.
I don't have well, one thing about the ranking system, there's no transparency, no checks and balances to prevent this ranking system from being used to target or to retaliate against the growers. And one of the things about this ranking system that when it comes into, one of the things that comes into play is the company says that some of the growers, when they're cut off, they're bad growers. Well, this ranking system, you're not started out equal. And the system is controlled by the company. I think it's unfair because of the lack of transparency. It gives the company the ability to terminate or penalize growers based on false claims of poor performance that in fact is out of the grower's control. I understand why the company finds this system attractive, but there's one thing that I don't understand is why our federal government allows this to continue. And I really believe that it's an unfair system.
Another comment that's been in a couple of the presentations has to do with the issue of debt and the leverage that debt either does or doesn't provide in a relationship. And I'd be curious to have the panel's views on whether or not the issue of debt creates an impetus to accept things that you would otherwise not be willing to accept, but for the fact that you're concerned about having continued business and the debt and the ability to repay the debt. Is that a serious issue for growers? Shane, let me start with you.
I think definitely that is an issue because of the extreme debt load. Anybody under that kind of a debt and realizing that there's no other way besides poultry, being in the poultry industry, that you could actually pay off that debt, it does put a definite strain on any to accept conditions given by integrators. I've been very fortunate that my integrator in our area and all the employees In our complex, I grow for Tyson Foods out of the Sneed area, and all the employees have been very easy to work with, but and done a good job, but they do not understand the pressures put on us, as a lot of them do not understand the pressures put on us by debt.
I would have to say that, yeah, it puts you in a position to where you don't see another way out of it. I mean, in our case, the farm has been in our family, you know, for over 250 years. And what are you going to do? You're going to do what they tell you to do, because you can't afford. You've got the farm put up. You know, you've got your great grandparents' home place and everything put up. You can't afford to risk all that.
I agree 100% with what was just said. In fact, when I received my contract, in order for me to receive my first birds, I had to first invest over $10,000 in upgrade before they would even bring me chicken. Yes.
Yes, I'd like to read and comment to that, something that I already had in my statement. When I retired from teaching in 1993 and was considering building 2 500-foot chicken houses, I was promised this long-term relationship as long as I raised a good bird, followed the company's instructions. And initially I was provided with a contract for that 10-year length of the loan. However, a few years later, the company brought out another version of this contract and said I needed to sign it to continue to get chickens. Before the end of the initial 10-year term, the company again changed that contract to a 1-year term. I realized that the company could change contracts easily by threatening to stop placing birds if I refused to sign. Well, it's typical for growers to be asked to do expensive upgrades on their poultry houses before this first loan of this building has been paid off. I know because I was one of those growers. The threats put before you, this communication, the threat is put before you. If you do not do this, they're not going to bring you any more chickens to grow. This is extortion, plain and simple. So the growers go out to their lenders and they tell them, okay, the company wants me to put in new equipment. The lender says, sure, how much you need? We'll fix you right up. The grower is now in deeper debt and has put up more collateral, most of the time his own personal home. The company tells the grower if they make these upgrades that they're going to get paid more under this ranking system. I asked the company managers, I went to them and I said, you want me to do this? Show me on paper where I'm going to make this money back to justify borrowing more money when I still owe money on these houses. They couldn't do it. Growers that have made these mandatory upgrades are now finding themselves in financial trouble. Some have gotten off-farm jobs. Some are refinancing these loans in order to make the payments. 10, 15-year poultry loans are turning into 30-year loans with no more than a flock-to-flock guarantee. When companies get into trouble financially, they need to cut production and the growers suffer. In North Carolina, there are growers that have borrowed a lot of money to make the upgrades demanded by the company. And then the company, because of bad financial decisions, terminated their contract. Depending on how many houses the growers had, the debt can be thousands or even millions of dollars. Precious farmland and homes were put up to do what the company demanded. This is where this unfair ranking system comes into play again. The company said that some of these growers were cut off because they were bad growers. How did they get labeled a bad grower? They got labeled a bad grower by the ranking system. They had no control over the inputs, but then they were labeled by this. This past Monday morning in North Carolina, one of these bad growers went out, drove down a country road. He was terminated from his contract, about to lose his home, took a gun, and ended his life. That's what we're talking about here today. This is personal. It gets real for poultry growers. And what we're asking today is the USDA and the Department of Justice to help these contract poultry growers.
Carol, what about debt and the leverage that it creates?
In our particular
Well-
area, we're very fortunate because of the relationship between USDA and the banks. 80% of the loans in the counties that I'm in, the counties surround me, are guaranteed by USDA funds. Throughout that guarantee process, USDA has reviewed that poultry contract and has reviewed the terms of the loan and said, yes, these two are equal. There's enough cash flow to make the payment. You know, I don't know that much about USDA rules, but it looks like what wouldn't be in place for one state would be for all. But the USDA looks over these contracts and helps balance the grower's cash flow, or has impact upon the grower's cash flow from the very beginning, that makes the amortization of these loans fit the terms of the contract.
So in your area, it's the reliance on the guarantee that USDA provides?
It is, and it's faith that you can put in the fact that obviously USDA knows more about it than you do, so you have a feeling going forward that it will work.
So if I understand your comment correctly, you're suggesting that there's not as much leverage as some of these other folks have experienced because of that?
That's exactly right.
Okay. Carol, how about your experience?
I think that debt has a major influence over what a grower does, what a grower doesn't do, what they say, what they don't say, what's popular, what's not popular. I don't know about the USDA loans. I don't know. I'm just wondering if we all should be after you all for giving us bad advice. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Along those same lines, if it's such a good contract, why does it have to be guaranteed? If, you know, I got mine and it's not guaranteed, and I put some money in it, but my bank done mine because of my personal wealth or my equity that I'm putting in there. So what I'm saying, if these contracts are as good as these people say they are, why do they have to be guaranteed?
Since we're kind of piling on USDA here,
Want to turn to DOJ for a minute?
well, let me just ask this one question, then I will turn to you, Christine. I'm sorry, I'm probably monopolizing this, but I am obviously interested in the discussion that was started between GIPSA and DOJ when there are problems and folks feel the necessity of going to the next step of filing a complaint. And I'm interested in the reaction of everyone. I think, Carol, you brought this up, and everyone else's reaction about what would be, how do you solve that problem? Do you perceive it as a problem? And if so, how do you solve it? Would you be interested in GIPSA having more enforcement authority as was possibly suggested? Or do you think that there is a process of improving the current system so it works better? Gary, your thoughts about that?
I personally think that GIPSA needs a little more authority. I don't want to take anything away from DOJ because I'm pretty sure they got their plate pretty full. As I understand it right now, or the people I know in GIPSA, especially the one you introduced and you put him on the spot, he's a pretty good man, I think, Mr. Butler. I think there's been a tremendous turnaround since he's been there as far as somebody wanting to help us in the poultry industry. In the past, from what I knew of GIPSA, poultry was about as low down on the list as you could get. I think you're going in the right direction with having full enforcement from GIPSA for poultry, beef, you know, the whole meat industry.
Gary, your thoughts about that, if you have any?
I'm not very familiar with the enforcement authority of GIPSA, but I had always looked at GIPSA as being, for lack of better terms, the DOT of the poultry industry. I felt like the integrators had a tremendous amount of respect for when GIPSA was brought up and how it functions today, and the fact that we've got more credible people in GIPSA looking at the rules, I think is a positive thing, but I'm not familiar with the enforcement branch.
Thoughts on this side? Yeah, Kate, I'll start with you.
Well, when I was thinking about this, I came up with 3 suggestions, and one would be to prohibit that use of that unfair ranking system. There are other ways that companies could pay growers that create incentives for growers to do a good job without the unfairness of that ranking system. Another one would be make it unlawful for companies to force these growers these expensive upgrades in their poultry houses at their own expenses. Upkeep is one thing, but if the companies are convinced that these expensive upgrades will improve their bottom line, then maybe that's something they should be paying for. They might be a little bit more cautious about what they are requiring. And then the third thing was to work together to enforce the Packards and Stockyards Act and to investigate why the poultry market is so broken that growers pay, like Shane said, he lost money last year, but it's been basically flat for the past 15 years.
So do you think that GIPSA should have more enforcement authority, or do you think that there should be some kind of improvement to the current system so that the Department of Justice would act?
Well, I think there's some rules there that have not, being enforced, but yeah, I think GIPSA needs more enforcement authority.
Agree. They need more authority.
I think they need more on-farm authority. My biggest concern is that there's really no open market for poultry, except in my situation, which I'd like to read my prepared statement in a few minutes, about, what we're doing where we're direct marketing. But, you can still go to the stockyards and you can still sell cattle and you can still sell, you might not be much of a market, but you can sell a little bit of pigs. But there's no open market at all for poultry. So there's no options for those growers who have those houses who choose to grow out from under contract, except to grow on a small scale and start building their own entrepreneurial business and doing direct marketing. And then you get hit with what I'd like to talk about, which is the lack of opportunities as far as slaughter.
Why don't you just briefly touch on that?
Okay. Well, as you all know, we had 16 years that we raised under contract, my family did, and at the end of that time, my dad was left with $80,000 debt that had to be paid off. So there we were with the farm, and we didn't want to lose the farm, so we had to start treading water. Well, we were raising lamb, and I had been selling the meat at the local farmers market, and I had developed a core group of customers. I encouraged Dad to start raising chicken to sell at the farmers market. This couldn't pay off the huge debt that he had incurred, but it was better than nothing. Soon we were getting requests from restaurants, buying clubs, and several small co-op grocery stores. Demand was growing, but the new problem was a lack of slaughter infrastructure. The nearest independent slaughterhouse was 135 miles away. We would have to drive 270 miles round trip twice a week to process and pick up our birds, and then the owner decided to sell his property to a developer. So now we would have to take our birds to either Kingstree, South Carolina. I live in North Carolina, so we'd have to take them either to Kingstree, South Carolina, or Moneta, Virginia, an average of 426 miles round trip twice a week to be processed. It is worthwhile to note that all the while there were 3 chicken slaughter plants and 2 turkey slaughter plants within 1 hour of my farm, all owned by poultry corporations. With diesel fuel at over $4 a gallon, we were losing money and couldn't continue to drive that distance. Processing birds on farm under USDA exemption was not a viable option, as USDA has a 20,000 bird exemption under PL 90-492. But the North Carolina Department of Agriculture only allows 1,000 chickens to be slaughtered out from under inspection. It was apparent that we were going to have to stop raising chickens, even though there was a growing weekly demand. By then, we were marketing about 1,000 birds per week. In late 2007, Chaudhry Halal Meats of Siler City, North Carolina, opened a poultry processing plant. Even though this plant is 150 miles from our farm, it afforded us the opportunity to continue raising chickens and meet the growing demand. The biggest issue for independent poultry producers is a lack of local slaughter infrastructure. Vertical integration in the poultry industry over the last 50 to 60 years has decimated the processing infrastructure. North Carolina is seeing phenomenal growth in the local food movement. Consumers are taking the USDA's Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food campaign to heart, but a lack of local slaughter infrastructure and thus lack of availability of product will hamper the access of that and the success of that program. This intense vertical integration has made it very difficult for any independent farmer or cooperative group to compete financially. Because of processor ownership throughout the entire chain of production, these companies can sell poultry products for a lot less than I can. One chick will cost them about 15 cents to produce. I will have to pay $1 for that chick. Feed costs will be 2 to 3 times theirs, and processing 5 times their cost. The increasing cost of production means that I cannot be competitive in price with these large companies, and thus I must depend on the purchases of customers with more disposable income. I recognize that part of this is an issue of less volume, but demand for what we are producing is growing. However, a lack of local slaughter infrastructure is the greatest barrier that we face, and one that will severely inhibit opportunities for small and mid-sized poultry producers in the future. And I do have some recommendations, if that would be okay.
Well, if you could just summarize them, just because we're
under USDA, under this USDA exemption until this USDA poultry slaughter infrastructure is rebuilt. So we need that as an interim situation. USDA grants and loans should be clearly targeted to facilities for small and mid-sized independent producers or either producers forming cooperatives. The other thing is we really need for USDA to USDA's rural development funding for business and industry loans in order to guarantee these loans for the bricks and mortar construction on small and mid-scale slaughter facilities. I would like to ask for more coordination across the rural development programs. For example, the USDA Value Added Grant provides for feasibility studies. This funding could be used by a group of poultry farmers to work with economic development entities to see how many chickens would need to be grown in order to build a processing facility. Also, I'd like to see USDA FSIS to work with owners of small independent red meat slaughterhouses to add a poultry slaughter line and to help them with facility design so that they can meet the HACCP regulations. The last thing I'd like to say is I would like for you to consider how best to implement these recommendations. And what I want you to think about is if the next generation finds that the only pathway into poultry farming is to incur huge amounts of debt with no assurance of being able to pay it back, they may wisely decide not to farm.
okay. We just had an interesting briefing yesterday with national press and some of the press in Washington, D.C. about Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food. We just completed an inventory, a mapping inventory of all the processing facilities in the country, both in terms of cattle, in terms of pork, and in terms of poultry, and also the rendering facilities, and tried to match it up with where the smaller producers are so that we could determine where the gaps are. Our rural development folks were in the room. They are part of Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food, and they are interested in using the B&I program, the Business Industry Loan Program, to try to make loans available to those who want to get into that business. And as you know, and as you noted, we are working on regulations relative to these small mobile units, and we have already begun to fund a number of them, and we will continue to do that. So there is a process underway now in the last year in the Obama administration to try to create some energy for that type of activity. Shane, let me give you an opportunity to comment briefly on the GIPSA DOJ issue, and then I'd like to turn it over to Christine for any questions and comments that she has.
I've never had, I've been fortunate. I haven't had some of the situations that some of these other growers have concerns and things happen to them. So personally, I don't know much about the GIPSA regulations and stuff, but the only thing I would say about it is maybe make it more public of how to start that process, because I've never needed to, but if I did, I wouldn't know where to start.
Well, mention was made of Dudley Butler, and just so you know, this guy's here today doing his job. His farmstead was recently, for all intents and purposes, totally destroyed with the exception of his home as a result of the recent tornado. So, Dudley, we appreciate you being here, notwithstanding your own personal circumstances.
Well, Secretary, I have to say the panel has been eye-opening for me, and I have lots of follow-up questions I don't think I'll be able to get to today, so you can expect to hear from me. But, Mr. Staples, let me say, I fully expect you will not experience retaliation by virtue of your presence today, but if you do, you call me at this number because I want to know about it. What I really want to follow up on, Secretary, is this competitiveness on the contracting side. And I have a couple of questions that I'd like to get the panelists to think about. If we don't have time to talk about them now fully, certainly during the break and afterwards. I'm very interested in your experience after 23 years when you were terminated. Were you able to switch integrators? Were you able to go somewhere else?
No, we weren't able to switch integrators. Again, even though there's 4 companies in the area, what one wants, they all want.
How does that actually work? I would think a grower of your reputation should, in a competitive market, it should be fairly easy to switch.
It really, I don't think it really matters as far as reputation goes. It's just a matter of they won't put chickens on the farm and they won't give you a contract. You know, the upgrades that were demanded of us, had we gone to another company, they would have said the same thing. And even though, you know, we had a good growing history, we wouldn't have had one with another company. We would have been starting out at the very beginning with a record with a new company.
So then it's a reduction in capacity if they're not replacing you, or are they expanding somebody else's capacity? What happens when your contracts are terminated? Is capacity just reduced in your area, or does it?
No, they get other people to build houses, or you know, they phase in more birds in other places. No, every year in our area they are increasing production. Mm-hmm. More birds are being produced every year.
And I'm very interested in the upgrades that you all have talked about. Can you tell me a little bit, because I'm here to learn, I don't know that much about your industry. What, in your view, are the kinds of upgrades that are reasonable and appropriate and right for the integrators to be wanting from their growers? And what are the kinds of baskets of upgrades that, in your view, are used basically to take you out of business, which is what I'm hearing you say today?
Well, sometimes, the upgrades can be, it depends on what they're asking. Now, and another thing, it might be the company, okay, you started out, you built these houses by the company's specs, okay? And then the company, they decide, well, you know, we're not going to grow this 6-pound bird anymore. We're going to grow a 9-pound bird. So that means, although you just built these houses 4 years ago, you're going to have to go back in debt $80,000 because we want these big fans put in there. We want a more cooling system put in there because we're going to this bigger bird. It's got to be cooled more. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the grower foots that expense for the company to grow the bird that's going to make them more money. Mm-hmm. And the thing about it is, when you put those upgrades in, sometimes like the companies will say, okay, we're going to give you, you do this and we will give you a little bit extra. But that extra will never cash flow to pay for that expense. And that's where the grower gets into the debt problem. Mm-hmm.
What I would like to say is, from our family's experience and the community's experience in North Carolina, these companies are always looking, when they're looking in expansion mode, they're looking for new houses. I mean, the newest houses that they can get. And what I had talked about earlier that happened is when the tobacco allotment buyout was going on, there were farmers who had houses that had been taken on by this company that were former Purdue growers, and they were taken on by Case Farms. And in that situation, they built 2 new houses to Case's specifications for Case. But what Case did was went out and talked some farmers who didn't grow poultry into building brand new houses for them. And so when they got those brand new houses, those new farmers to start growing, they went back and dropped those houses that they had initially taken on that were former Purdue growers. So now this farmer may have 4 houses or 6 houses on his property, and maybe only 2 of them have chickens in them, and the other 4, even though they had the same equipment in them, don't have that.
And then one other question I have that I think I'll probably have to follow up with more offline, but if any one of you could tell me, are you in co-ops? Are there co-ops for growers? Does Capra-Volstead work for you?
There was a co-op, Gold Kist, and it went public, and I think that was the last one.
And why don't co-ops work? You're all shaking your head, no, it's not going to work.
They probably would. It's just, I guess you need to know some poultry growers. It's just hard to get a lot of poultry growers to say yes to anything together, but that's probably one of the biggest problems.
Any other thoughts on that?
Also, we have several grower-based programs and organizations, but I think we mentioned earlier about the debt and
Right.
that I think a lot of growers are afraid to get too involved with anything that would go against the status quo because of their debt.
Okay, well, Secretary, I have a lot of work to do from this. I mean, I want to really understand our role in the GIPSA process on the complaint side. I'm wondering why complaints aren't treated confidentially until a certain point in time. I think there's probably more streamlining we could do. Whether or not GIPSA has the authority, we can certainly provide troops and help and do what we can do. I want to understand more about the contracting practices and see what we can do to help make sure that that's a competitive marketplace. And I want to thank all of you. I know you take time out of your livelihood to come here and talk to us, and in my part, to educate me. Thanks.
I want to join with the Assistant Attorney General's remarks to the panel. I want to thank you for taking the time and being able to share not only your personal stories, but in some cases some painful stories of friends and neighbors who have been impacted by this industry. My commitment to the folks who are here today and to poultry growers across the country is to continue to work hard with Dudley and those in the GIPSA area to make sure that our regulatory system is as good as it needs to be to make sure that growers and producers have a fair shake. I mean, at the end of the day, that's ultimately what it's about. I, too, have learned a good deal here, and I'm sure Dudley, it's strengthened his resolve as well to do a good job. This is obviously an issue that will require a very close analysis. The Congress has directed us to do that in the 2008 Farm Bill. We began that process with rules that we published last year in an effort to try to make a greater equity in the relationship and to make sure that folks had notice if contracts were going to be terminated, that they weren't left without any opportunity to try to seek alternative contracts and alternative opportunities. But this is obviously a difficult issue, a set of difficult issues. And I might say that it is reflective of a deep concern that I share with you today, and that is about the future of our rural communities generally. I think it is very important for the rest of the country to know what you know about the challenges and struggles of producers in this country. I think the rest of us take what you all do for us for granted, whether it's the producers or whether it's the folks who process and slaughter the livestock, or the folks who pick our fruits and vegetables along the entire stream here. We as a country do not appreciate and do not reflect our appreciation for those who give us a safe, abundant, affordable supply of food, which really puts us in a much more competitive circumstance economically. So we owe you a fair shake, and I'm committed to doing that as long as I'm the Secretary of Agriculture. With that, let me ask you to show your appreciation for the panel, and we will reconvene shortly after lunch.
I got started